Francis Ngannou is officially out of the UFC. He seems to be shifting his focus to boxing now. But if there's one man with a lot to say about the whole thing, it's Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen is not a fan of how Francis Ngannou handled his negotiations with the UFC. According to the American Gangster, one of Ngannou's re-signing demands was for there to be an advocate to represent the fighters in boardroom meetings. Chael believes that would be a conflict of interest and wouldn't work. During an interview, Ngannou shed light on his contractual issues with the UFC. He revealed he asked for several things, such as the right to sponsorship, a fighter advocate, and health insurance. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to get him a new deal with the promotion. Former UFC light heavyweight champion Jon Jones also weighed in on Ngannou's exit. He said, "I'm glad that Francis knows his worth. No man has a right to shame another man for fighting for his worth." He also added that he was in a very similar situation to Francis as a light heavyweight. He had to sit out for 3 years and missed a lot of time. "I encourage Francis on his journey, and I wish him all the best. Another company is going to be truly blessed to have him," Jones said. The potential super fight between Ngannou and Jones was something that MMA fans desperately wanted to see happen, only for their hopes to be dashed when Ngannou didn't re-sign with the UFC. It's a huge shame that we won't get to witness what would have been an epic battle between two of the biggest names in MMA. Both fighters had different approaches in regards to negotiation. While Jon Jones had to sit out for 3 years and miss a lot of time, Francis Ngannou chose to walk away from the promotion so he could find a better deal. But back to Chael. It doesn't seem like he's too happy with the outcome. Chael was surprisingly anti-Ngannou throughout the whole process. He simply wanted to see him and Jon Jones fight, and that's clearly not happening anytime soon. I mean, I can understand why he's upset. Everyone wanted to see that fight. It would have broken pay-per-view records. But Ngannou isn't like that. He doesn't care about breaking records or earning money anymore. He sees himself as a senior figure in the industry and an example for young fighters to follow. Chael Sonnen, however, is confident that we could still see the Predator return to the octagon. Speaking of Ngannou's decision to leave the UFC, Sonnen compared the Cameroonian situation to Jon Jones's recent absence from the cage. The former heavyweight champion had set personal interest aside to negotiate a deal with the UFC, but his demands were rejected. Sonnen believes that Ngannou is simply taking a break and won't be retiring anytime soon. He thinks it's just a matter of time before he and the UFC come to terms, which could open up a highly anticipated super fight between him and Jones. The American Gangster believes Ngannou will be back in the octagon with a collection of impressive wins under his belt by the end of 2021. He argued that if Bones is able to pass Cyril Gane at UFC 285 on March 5th, then it's only a matter of time before Ngannou and Jones finally face off in the octagon. It remains to be seen what will happen with Ngannou's future, but he has certainly not been forgotten about. After all, he was the first African-born fighter to win a UFC world title and still holds some of the record knockout power in MMA. Ngannou has been one of the most dominant champions in UFC history, and Sonnen is sure he will be back to show us why. It's been a rough few weeks for Francis Ngannou, and it just got rougher with the UFC delivering its final snub. As part of their tribute to Black History Month, the UFC released a video featuring some of the most iconic fighters from the modern era, but Ngannou was nowhere to be seen. With Ngannou now leaving the organization, it seems the UFC has been a little cheeky with this snub. In the video, fans and fighters could see Jon Jones, Israel Adesanya, Kamaru Usman, and Aljamain Sterling, all featured as part of the tribute. However, one fighter even included in the clip left many scratching their heads. Former champion Demetrius Johnson, who has not fought under the UFC banner since 2018. So if they were fine with having Johnson in the video, a former fighter, why not Ngannou? Between the two of them, we all know who had a bigger impact. It was clear the Predator was erased from the record books, and it didn't go unnoticed. Luke Rockhold led the protest with a tweet encouraging the UFC UFC to acknowledge Ngannous' achievements in MMA. "Baddest man on the planet, straight from Africa," he said. Other Twitter users pointed out Johnson's inclusion, asking why he was getting more recognition than Ngannou, while one fan said the UFC had done him dirty. "It's a shame to see such a talented fighter being treated like this." Ngannou has gone through one of the craziest stories anyone could hear, from growing up in Cameroon, moving to Paris, and then on to America. He is one of the most iconic African fighters in MMA, and for the UFC to overlook his achievements is a slap in the face to him. That too on Black History Month? I know the UFC never really respected minorities, but this is a step too far. Hopefully, this snub won't be held against Ngannou for too long, and he can move on to the next chapter of his career with pride. There's no doubt he deserves better recognition than this. Let's hope the UFC can make it up to him soon. Dana White was also personally very disrespectful to Ngannou when he announced he was leaving. Shortly after the announcement, Dana had a few things to say. While he was clearly sad about his star heavyweight leaving the company, he also had a few insults. He said that Ngannou was probably scared of fighting Jon Jones. If you know anything about Ngannou, you know for a fact that he isn't scared about fighting anyone. I mean, he might have been the most dominant heavyweight in history. Jon Jones isn't even a proper heavyweight. The fight against Jon Jones was probably the last reason Ngannou left. He was probably looking forward to it. It was gonna be the biggest payday of his life. Ngannou didn't leave because of the Jon Jones fight. He left in spite of it. But could the Predator make a return to the UFC? The answer seems to be no. After making a huge impact in the organization, Ngannou left on somewhat of a sour note with Dana White and company. Further complicating matters is the fact that Ngannou has his sights set on a venture into boxing. He's already made it clear that he wants to take on Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Dillian Whyte. But don't count the UFC out just yet. There have been rumors of Ngannou coming back to the octagon, especially if he is able to make a huge impact in the boxing world. It would be an instant draw for fight fans, and the UFC could benefit from it in more ways than one. One thing is certain: if Ngannou does return, it's going to be entertaining as hell. The Predator has been known to put on a show inside the octagon, and if he ever returns to the UFC, there's no doubt that fans will be in for a treat. Do you think he'll return? See you in the next one.